Vani, I'm so excited to have you on the Mind Your Hormones podcast. I've been such a fan of yours for so long. I'm just so inspired by all the work that you do. It's like just so incredible. And I know my community is going to be obsessed with everything that you have to offer. So before we dive into the nitty gritty, if you could just introduce yourself, I would just love for everyone to get to know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Vani Hari. I'm a food activist, mom of two. I've written 4 books now. The latest book is coming out very soon in
Oh,
the
it's so
fall,
good.
and it's called Food Babe Family. I am the founder also of Truvani, a supplement company that makes amazing protein powders
Oh,
and
it's so
bars and
good.
other supplements that have the least amount of unnecessary ingredients in it's possible, and they taste the best.
They taste so good.
Um,
I always promote your protein powder.
oh, well, thank you.
It's
Thank
so
you.
good.
Yeah, that's me. So
Amazing. So, how did you get into all of this? Because like you've been a food activist for a while now, like you have had giant food companies like Kraft and Subway like change their food ingredients. Like you really made such a big mark on really focusing on ingredients and things and how we can just get the shit out of it that we don't need and really having people be held accountable. So, how did you get into this? I know a lot of people in the health space get into it from their own personal struggles. So, I would love to hear your backstory on what made you get into this field.
sure. Yeah. No, I had the same thing. So I think when we struggle with our health, once we find our good health, we can't shut up about it. And
Yeah.
that's really what happened to me is, I grew up with eczema, asthma, allergies. I was always on prescription drugs. My parents were immigrant Indian parents, so they wanted us to fit in like with everybody else. And my mom didn't really know how to cook Indian food. I mean, I'm sorry, American food. And she only
Mm.
knew how to cook Indian food. And so I wanted to eat what everybody else was eating. And so she relied heavily on all of the processed products that she could find at the grocery store to help her in the kitchen. And then on top of that, my parents really loved the fact that fast food was so cheap and readily
Mhm.
available, and it was so easy, and we would eat it. So I grew up having fast food multiple times a week. I would say
Wow.
sometimes maybe every day.
Wow.
Just really inundated with like I don't even remember eating like one vegetable when I was little.
Mm.
And and also just having access to a lot of candy too. Like I ate every single candy under the sun. My dad, his thing was to bring me back gummy bears from his office when he would work late at night. He was
Mm.
a professor at university, so he had classes at night, and he would come back late and he would always give me gummy bears. And it was just, I mean, I just grew up on candy and fast food. And
Mm.
when I was in my early 20s, I hit rock bottom. I was, working on at this very prestigious consulting firm, working on the road, traveling. And again, I found myself in this situation where I just wanted to fit in and eat what everybody else was eating. And so the office would cater in breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So for breakfast, it would be like bagels and blueberry muffins. And then for lunch, it would be like this big spread of barbecue. And then at dinner time, it would be like, Italian. So it'd be like
Yeah.
pasta and chicken parmesan and tiramisu for dessert. So it was just like this very heavy, salty, processed food that like we were getting from restaurants made in who knows what kind of oils and just all kinds of different additives that could be in that food, and just processed foods, not a lot of plants really, not a lot of
Mhm.
greens. And so I gained a lot of weight on that first job, and then I ended up in the hospital with appendicitis. And
Wow.
it was at that moment that I made a decision that I didn't want to feel this way anymore. And that's when I started to research health and nutrition. And I used kind of like my knowledge that I learned in high school, where I was a #1 ranked debater in my state, and I got recruited to
Oh.
college to be in debate. And back then, when I was doing debate, we really learned how to research. Like we went to the library and we'd look at the microfiche, and we'd check out these big law journals and all these newspapers, and we gather all of our evidence. Well, I did the same thing with my health. So I went to the library and I checked out big books on nutrition. And one of the first ones was Gabriel Kusin's Conscious Eating.
Mm.
And it had this concept in there that it just turned a light bulb on in my head. And it was that the majority of food that I was eating was dead, was
Mm.
processed and dead. It
Wow.
literally, and I was like, well, that's exactly how I feel,
Yeah,
right? Like, that's
exactly.
exactly how I felt for most of my life, is dead, zombie-like. Like, I don't, yeah, I have probably good genes and I made it through, college and high school and school. And I was
Yeah.
like, driven because my parents like drove me to like, do well in school. But
Hmm.
like, wow, what if I didn't feel like a zombie? What if I actually didn't feel dead? What
Yeah.
could be possible? Right. And so when I started to change my diet to whole real foods, like things that came from the earth and not
Phew.
from a bag
Excuse
or
me.
a box.
Sorry.
And I eliminated all the chemicals that I was learning about and that had been invented in the last 50 years. Um,
Wow.
I realized that those chemicals weren't there for my nutritional purpose. They were actually
Right.
there just to help the food companies themselves make more money, whether it's
Mm.
making a product taste better than it should because it's sitting on the shelf, or it's a product that creates cravings, or it's a chemical that adds color to make it look like you're eating real food when you're not.
Wow.
All of these different reasons why chemicals were invented to put in our food. I just found out, like, well, why would I want to eat those chemicals? Like, they don't actually do anything in my body to help me become healthy. Why don't I just eliminate all those chemicals and just eat real food?
Mm.
And when I did that, my whole life changed. I went off
Mhm.
9 prescription drugs. My
Wow.
weight normalized for the first time ever, where to the point where I never had to diet again or even worry about losing weight. And, you're pregnant, which I think is so
Mhm.
amazing. You're going to be giving birth very
Yeah.
soon. And it's, one of the things that is on a lot of women's minds when they become pregnant is like, oh, am I gonna get back into my pre-baby, self, right?
Mhm.
Am I gonna have this weight forever? Like, is it gonna be easy or hard to get rid of? And I just want to tell you, if you're eating a whole real food diet, getting back to your normal self or a close version of it is relatively easy when you
Mhm.
don't use processed foods if you don't eat processed foods.
It's
And
really
I
game
wish
changing.
I would have known that, because actually I was worried about it a little bit, right? I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, am I gonna have this pouch on my tummy forever? Like,
Yeah.
you just don't know. But it just,
Yeah.
within 6 to 9 months, you're just like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I just went back to my normal diet and I didn't have
Yeah.
to do anything drastic or go on any crazy regimen. I
Mhm.
just had to eat real food. And it just goes to show that, like, when you eat real food, your body does what it needs to do with that.
Yes.
And you can really achieve health that you never thought was possible. And it was at this time that I gave up television.
Mm.
And when I gave up television, I found all this time, because I was still working in the corporate world, traveling, going to different cities and working with C-level executives. And I started this blog, foodbabe.com. I wanted to call it eathealthyliveforever.com. My husband thought that was a horrible name. And so he found food. He's like the tech geek in the family. So he found foodbabe.com for $10 off auction,
Oh my
and
gosh.
like yelled it from
Wow.
the other room. We were living in like a 2 bedroom apartment at the time. And I was just like, yeah, that's perfect. And,
So
and
crazy to
so,
see what it turns into now when you have that, like, memory of it starting. So
yeah,
cool.
I know, it's crazy. And so we called it Food Babe. And I said, well, I'm not the food babe, right? Like, I
Mhm.
just want to teach other people to become the food babe. But then I found myself hiding behind the name Food Babe because I didn't want to put my real name out there, because I was still working in the corporate world. So I
Mm.
signed every blog post Food Babe. And so if you
Yeah.
read a lot of my older blog posts, they were like signed Food Babe, XOXO Food Babe, instead of Bonnie. And so um, I I realized that starting this blog created this community of people outside of just my friends and my mom. And I
Mm.
realized that I was like starting to connect with like-minded people. And that was so exciting for me,
Oh,
because
it is.
prior to being a blogger, I never was on social media. So the only, like, I got on social media because like my friends were like, well, how are you going to share your blog with us? You have to like tell us on Facebook. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll join Facebook.
Right.
And so I joined Facebook, and I was like one of the last people ever to join Facebook.
When
Okay.
did you start your blog? What year was this?
2011.
Okay.
Yeah, I was one of the last people to join Facebook. I'm
Yeah.
maybe my mother after that, but you know. So anyways, um, and so I started social media, I started the blog, and then I realized that all this information that I was learning was stuff that like maybe other people don't know. And
Yeah.
maybe the ways that I felt duped and the things that I was eating that I thought were healthy that aren't actually healthy, they needed to know about too. So I started to share those experiences with people on the blog. And one of the first experiences I had was with a quote unquote organic yogurt company that I saw at the mall selling frozen yogurt. And they had these signs on the window that said organic tastes better. And I said, wow, this is so amazing. We have organic frozen yogurt at the mall. This is great. We can have a treat that's like somewhat healthy. Like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, then when I went and got my favorite flavor, taro, it was bright, bright blue. And taro is like this root that you can get in Southeast Asia, and it's really tasty. And I was like Googling it, like thinking, you know, is it bright blue? Like, what is the color of this root? You know, and it is somewhat have a hint of blue, but not that bright. And so I started to ask questions about like, what else is in this yogurt? Yeah, you start with organic milk, but like, what else is in it? And so eventually one of the guys that worked there showed me this big bag of powdered substance full of artificial food dyes and trans fats and preservatives. And I took a picture of it. I published it on my blog and like shared the information with everybody. And it went so viral within my community, my little community. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of people following me at all. It was just like my friends sharing it with their friends who shared it with their friends. And to the point where the head of the company sent me a letter, apologized, and then took down the marketing.
Wow.
And so that was the first time I got a taste of like what activism was.
Yeah.
And I didn't set out to become a food activist or anything. I was just sharing my experience, what I was learning through my own research, because I just had this insatiable curiosity about what I had been eating up until that point and what I should be eating.
Right.
And so I decided that I was just going to share everything that I thought was interesting about processed food that I was eating. And one of the next things I shared was like all the ingredients in a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich.
Oh my
and
gosh.
it was like close to 100. One of the first ones was MSG, and
100 ingredients?
Yes. And MSG was one of the first ones. Then there's all sorts of chemicals in there, like TBHQ, which affects the immune system and also your allergies. And then there was dimethyl polysiloxane, which is like an ingredient in silly putty that can be preserved with formaldehyde. The FDA doesn't regulate it. All sorts of artificial food dyes that are linked to hyperactivity in children and allergies and asthma and skin issues. So all sorts of chemicals in there. And this blog post went so viral that I couldn't believe it, but Chick-fil-A reached out to me and invited me to their headquarters.
Wow.
And I've been
Were you nervous?
What'd you say?
Were you nervous to go?
Oh, absolutely. Like I had been consulting big financial institutions at this point for 10 years. And so meeting with executives was like my thing, right? Like I could handle that, but like going there and telling them like their food sucks and they need to change it was a little daunting, right? They picked me up in a cow mobile, like a cow mobile, like a car covered in cow print.
Oh my God.
And they did the whole dog and pony show and really tried to impress me. And they were the nicest people on earth. So it's like so hard to get mad at them. And that was the whole point, right? Is for me to meet them, become friends, acquaintances, whatever, and me like kind of back off with the blog.
Right. Take the blog down or something.
But that wasn't the case, right? Like I just told them, like I sat down with a guy that was the head chicken supplier and the head of marketing and the head of operations. And I just like told them, like, here's the things that need to change. We prioritize them.
Wow.
And within 6 months, they decided to go antibiotic free. They started removing all these different chemicals that I'd point out in their sandwiches.
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're still making changes.
That's amazing.
And so it was that moment that I had to like take PTO from work to go to Chick-fil-A to consult there, that I realized like, wait a minute, me working in the financial institutions is like not my calling. Like I really do need to just work in the food industry and change the food industry and like teach people what I'm learning about food and
Yeah.
everything that I've taught myself. And so I started doing that. As soon as I quit my job, I remember it just opened up a huge availability, I feel like, in my brain to like
Yeah.
really research what was going on. And the next thing that I discovered was one of the worst, I think, atrocities that happen in the food industry. And that's when American companies reformulate their products better and safer for citizens like in Europe. And they
Oh,
don't use those same formulations here in the United States. A
that was
perfect
the next thing I
example.
wanted to ask you, because what is that? So like, why are there such different ingredients here than in Europe? Because when I've traveled there, I see it firsthand. And then I know you always share about that and it's mind blowing. So I would love for you to go into that.
So one of the things that is a perfect example of this is cereal. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you look at Kellogg's cereal, the Fruit Loops in Europe doesn't have artificial food dyes, and the Fruit Loops here do. And so, they're a company that already has the formulation. They already know how to
Right.
make their cereals better. They're actually products that are targeting children who are the ones that are most harmed by these artificial food dyes,
Mm-hmm.
and because they cause hyperactivity in children. And in Europe, if you use an artificial food dye, you have to put on the label may cause adverse effects on activity and attention in children. Well,
Wow.
instead of putting that label on products, Kellogg's, Kraft, Subway, I mean, every McDonald's, I mean, every single food manufacturer you could think of that sells food in Europe takes out those chemicals instead.
Right.
And they
So it could
know
be
it's better
done.
and safer, but
Mm-hmm.
they still sell us the cheaper, more toxic versions. And that hypocrisy, unethical behavior is something that led me to start many petitions, whether it was the
Yeah.
petition against Kraft to remove artificial food dyes in mac and cheese, or Subway to remove azodicarbonamide, which was a chemical that they use in yoga mats. Like when you look at a yoga mat or a piece of rubber on the side, you kind of see these little air bubbles evenly dispersed. Well,
Yeah.
that chemical also does that in bread. So they found a use for it in bread, but when it's heated, it turns into a carcinogen. And when you inhale it, if you
Wow.
work with it, it causes asthma. So like, it's just something that doesn't belong in our food, right? It's not
Yeah.
food. And you have this, big, Subway used to be the number one fast food chain. It no longer is, because I believe of this campaign, outing the fact that their food was not eating quote unquote fresh, right? Their
Right.
tagline was eat fresh.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't fresh. And so I really wanted people to recognize that this was happening. And that was one of the first things that I really started to study after I quit my job. And I just started to make it my mission to call out this hypocrisy and to do these different campaigns. And I took on others like Miller Coors and Anheuser-Busch, because one of the things that when I would open up the fridge, the only thing I didn't know what was in there in terms of an ingredient list was beer. And
Yeah.
it's my husband's beer. I don't even drink beer. I didn't care about beer, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't tell you the last time I drank a sip of beer.
Yeah.
I just don't drink it, right? I like tequila on the rocks, but I don't
Yeah.
like beer. Okay. And so, but it bothered me that like we didn't know what was in it. And I
Right.
knew based on what I learned about the food industry and how screwed up the chemicals were in terms of creating cravings and making you
Mhm.
um, you know, taste a flavor that really isn't a natural flavor, like an actual natural flavor from nature. It's like
Right.
chemically manipulated, like all of these things that I was learning. I was like, well, they totally are doing this in the alcohol industry, right?
100%. Right.
And so when I started to research it, they are, and I was like, okay, they have to tell us what's in beer. This is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And so I pitted, at the time, Miller Coors and Anheuser-Busch were two separate companies, and I pitted them against each other. And I wanted to see which one would do it first. And within 48 hours, Anheuser-Busch is calling me, inviting me to their headquarters, and saying, yeah, we're gonna publish our ingredients.
Wow.
And at that meeting, it was really cool. I talked to them. I said, you guys really need to have an organic beer. And they're like, yeah, we tried an organic beer several years ago and it just didn't hit the market right. I go, times are changing. Try it
Mhm.
now. And now, if you've watched the Super Bowl in the last few years, you see advertisements for organic beer now, which is just
Yeah.
incredible to think that that's where we're headed. But
Wow.
um, a lot of beer manufacturers, as a result of that campaign, actually removed caramel coloring level 4 that they were adding to their beer to make it look like their hops was darker than it was.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's
So
so
like one of those
crazy.
companies was Newcastle. So this all started with Newcastle in my beer that I found, and I didn't know what the ingredients were. And when they decided to make the change, it was really cute. They emailed me and they said, "Hey, we thought you'd like to know, for your husband too, that we removed the purple coloring." And I was just like, "This is so cool."
Wow. It's
Yeah.
so, I mean, it's just so amazing that like you're doing all of this because a lot of these foods too are, a lot of lower economic families are reaching out for these foods because that's what they can afford, because this is just the world that we live in. A lot of times these are the cheaper options and stuff like that. And having all these ingredients in there, which I don't, it's just so crazy to me that they don't put it in foods in Europe, but they do here. Why do you think they do that? Because we aren't as like educated about it. We don't care about it. Like, why do you think it's that discrepancy is happening?
Well, the FDA is largely like being manipulated by food companies themselves. Like they either
Mm,
have representatives that like are ex food company people that they like plant in the government, or a lot of the lobbyists that are, you know, funding and advocating for certain candidates. They're preventing a lot of this legislation from being passed.
which
And it's
why?
unfortunate. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
front groups and other people that are preventing this information from getting to the right hands and to getting this legislation passed. I mean, there are some hopes in terms of what's happening in California. They just passed a bill. It still has to go through the Senate in order to be like enacted in legislation, but they passed the first step of it to remove titanium dioxide and several artificial dyes, which is incredible. And if that happens in California, because California is such a big part of the United States,
Yeah.
food manufacturers are probably going to have to remove artificial dyes across the United States.
Wow. That would be
So
so
if that
huge.
happens, that would be fantastic. And I mean, I see we're headed towards that. It's going to cost the food industry a lot of money
Hmm.
because they've already, all these big players like Kellogg's, M&M's, etc. They all said back in 2015, when I was hardcore on their case in terms of activism, and my book came out and a bunch of other things happened. They all declared that they're going to remove artificial food dyes, but now it's 2023 and it's been like, what, 8 years? It still hasn't happened. Even though
Mm.
they have the formulation, they're already using the formulation in Europe. They don't have to
So
reinvent the
crazy.
wheel.
Yeah.
And so it's just a matter of time. People are becoming so aware of these artificial food dyes that
Mhm.
food companies have to change.
Yes.
And there's too much money being shifted from those legacy food brands to the newer brands like Truvani, for example, like where we
Yep.
decide we're not going to put artificial sweeteners, we're not going to put natural flavors in our products, we're not going to put
Mhm.
all the different gums that can disrupt the gut in our products. We're going to
Yeah.
create the least of like necessary ingredients. We're going to use real ingredient, like real vanilla and real banana and real
Yeah.
chocolate in our products, or real peanut butter instead of a flavoring, right?
Hmm.
And so people really want, real food, and that's really where the movement's heading. And food companies are realizing that. I think, I hope that the cereal companies realize they're not going to be able to survive when there's all of these new cereal brands popping up that don't have artificial dyes, and kids will be
Exactly.
eating that.
Yeah.
Although
So,
my
and
kids have never had cereal, so cereal
yeah,
is not
so
a staple in our house.
let's talk about that because a lot of people listening are either, hoping to get pregnant at some point, are currently pregnant, or already have kids. So I know that your new book is totally focused around this, on really how you can incorporate this with your children. So what would you say are like, we could start with like the biggest, I don't know, maybe like red flag ingredients. Like I know you're talking about the dyes, artificial sweeteners. Like what can someone like look for on the back of a label to like see like, okay, this is like no, this is a definite no, because like you said, the dyes could lead to ADHD, hyperactivity, all of that stuff. And then like how can you help promote this like healthy eating habits in children at a young age? Because I know you dive into that a lot in the book, which was
Yeah, I
amazing.
mean, like, let's just back up. Like, the you as a parent And I really want to make clear to everyone listening, I'm not coming from like a sanctimonious place, right? Like I'm not trying to shame anyone in terms of how they've raised their kids or
Mhm.
what they do in terms of their daily eating patterns and habits and what they make for their children. I really want to share what's worked for me and my children and what I've seen as a result of my daughter being 6, my little boy being 2.5.
Mm.
Their eating compared to the majority of their peers is so crazily different, to the point
Yeah.
where I was like, I have to write this book. I have
Mhm.
to write Food Babe Family because parents have got to know what I'm doing and how I'm raising my kids, because like they could just totally make their kids like the best eaters in the whole world if they really wanted to, in terms of like it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of preparation, and it takes a priority in your life. Like to
Mhm.
me, if my kids are eating the healthiest foods, everything else is going to work out. They're
Right.
going to do well in school, they're going to do well at their sports, they're going to
So
have a good
true.
time, they're going to be happy kids, they're going to
Mhm.
sleep well.
Mm.
All of the things, they're going to be healthy, right? They're going
Yeah.
to stay out of the doctor's office. They're not going to have eczema and asthma and all the other issues that I had as a
Mhm.
kid,
It's a
right?
ripple
They're not going to
effect.
have as many sicknesses.
Mhm.
So if I literally just do my one job, keep them
Yeah.
safe and give them really good, healthy food and have
Mhm.
access to that all the time, I'm doing my job as a parent.
Right.
Everything else is gravy. I think everything
Yes.
else will work out, because I'll tell you, I wasn't able to do this work in terms of changing the world and changing the food industry had I not been feeling great about myself and feeling so good
Yes.
inside and feeling like vibrant, full of energy, and my brain like actually getting rid of all the fog and all the brain funk and the zombie like behavior,
Yes.
and like opening up like this idea of like, yes, I have the power to like change the food industry. I
Mhm.
don't think people can really find their calling and what they're meant to do in the world until they get their health right. I
Oh
really
my
do
God.
believe that. I feel like
Mic
there are
drop.
so
Like,
many people that are amazing in this world that are like celebrities, whatever, and there's a lot of them that don't have their health right, and I can tell. I can tell.
mhm.
So I'm like, they're, even though you think they're awesome, they're capable of so much more.
Yes, it's so
Um,
true, and you don't realize it until you're on the other side of it, like, you get so used to how you're feeling that you're just like, "Oh, this is just is what it is," until you start changing things and you feel so much better and you're like, "Oh my god, like, I didn't realize how much more, like, alive you can actually feel." Like, it's so and that's why where your passion comes from, because once you experience it, you're like, "I can't not share this."
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I did, that I was really fortunate with, is I breastfed both my children. I've been breastfeeding now for over 6 years. I'm still breastfeeding my two and a half
Amazing.
year old.
Oh,
And
amazing.
my daughter stopped breastfeeding on her own just one day when she was 3.5, when I was pregnant with my second. So I had a little bit of a break there, a few-month break, until my second one came, and they're 4 years apart.
Okay.
So
So amazing.
yeah, so breastfeeding really did help. And there are so many studies that look at what a baby's getting through breast milk that is different than, say, formula. So if you have
Mhm.
the option to breast milk, breastfeed or give breast milk, it really makes a difference, because they're getting exposed to all the flavors, all the tastes, everything that you are eating and all the variety that you're eating. They're also getting exposed to those flavors in breast milk.
So
It's different
cool.
every single time. Like your body's actually has different antibodies, different bacteria, and different probiotics are going into
Wow.
your baby's gut based on what they need in the feedback circle between the baby's lips on your nipple
Mhm.
and them, you even kissing them, like
So
you even kissing them,
incredible.
they're producing the signals to your body to produce the right types of chemicals that they need at that point in time in their breast milk.
How
It's
crazy is that?
absolutely, it's so miraculous and
It
so
is.
profound that I wish there were more commercials and studies and other things
Mhm.
being shared about this, because I think it's so beneficial.
Yeah.
Whereas you have to think, if you are giving formula, they're getting the same formula every single day,
Right.
right? It's the same set of ingredients every single day. Whereas your
Mhm.
breast milk is always changing. Even the fat content is changing depending
Right.
on where the child is in age. So,
Right.
so there is a tremendous difference if you have the opportunity to do that. Now, I know many women that did not have the opportunity to breastfeed, and that this conversation isn't meant uh to shine anything negative on the way you feed your baby. The most important thing is to feed a baby, right? Like you just have to feed babies, but there are ways if you do have to formula feed your babies. I don't talk about it in the book, but I have talked about it on my blog, that you can make your own formula. You can actually change up the types of oils and fats you're using, so you can have some variety in their diet.
Oh, amazing.
And then the best thing that I found is when they're 6 months of age and you start feeding them food, you give them soft table food. You don't start with purees. You actually do a method called baby-led weaning. And I talk about this in the book. And this is what I did with my own children. And I started to just steam vegetables. And I started with vegetables because I really wanted their palates to love vegetables more than fruits. Like fruits are going to be an automatic win
because they're sweet.
Child's diet because they're sweet, right? They're going to love that, and they're always going to gravitate towards that. And so I wanted my children to get like accustomed to like the bitter taste of kale and the bitter taste of Brussels sprouts and the different cruciferous vegetables out there. And I wanted them to have the wide range of textures so that their jaw is moving and chewing. And
so is that why you did the actual soft steamed instead of puree from a jaw perspective?
Well, no, you just don't want them to choke on it. So you can't give like a baby that doesn't have teeth yet,
instead of doing a puree first,
right? What?
I mean, instead of doing a puree first, what was the reasoning behind doing the like actual like food instead of a puree right away?
Oh yeah. So they gum the food. Yeah.
Right. So that's why.
Instead of just swallowing it. Right.
Okay. Got it. So they like get that muscle.
And there's actually a lot of discussion and research around jaw development, teeth development, and how all of that is related to actually allowing a child to have like real food when they start, and not have just purees. Now, I did have some purees, like I would mash avocado and feed that just so the baby's getting exposure to that food and kind of get to like it, and then eventually gravitating towards a piece of avocado where they just gum it and hold it with their hands, and there's this amazing website. I talk about all these resources in Food Babe Family, but there's this amazing website where it will like literally show you exactly how to cut your food and how to prepare your food based on the age of your child. Wow. It's called Solid Starts. I love them. And I talk about it in the book. And it's a baby-led weaning site. And it's just incredible to see all the different options and the exposure you can have with your kids. So I went through all the vegetables first, and then I brought in the fruits.
And something that you said, sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is important that you said in the book. I pulled this quote. You were like, children don't always like new foods the first time they taste them, perhaps not even the second or third time. Like to be offered a new food as many as 10 to 15 times before they'll eat it. So I think that's really important to note, especially with starting with vegetables, that if your kid doesn't like it right away, like, was this something you experienced where you had to introduce it multiple times?
Yeah. So like broccoli was not like a big thing right up from the beginning, right? Like broccoli was like, I don't know about this, like this green tree looking thing. Like, I'm not sure. Right. And they would play with it, and you have to let children play with it. That's the other thing that, again, when I said it takes a lot of patience, it gets a lot of patience in that there will be some food waste. There'll be thrown food, there'll be food that they licked and just left there, and it's organic. You're probably buying, hopefully you're buying organic broccoli or whatever. And it's like just sitting there and you're like, oh gosh, it's just going in the trash. Right. Yeah. That's a lot of money. But you have to just take a deep breath. This is a short time in your child's life, in your life. And these seeds that you're planting in your child's diet and their palate will be so fruitful and so amazing when they get older that you will just be so thrilled at the way that they're getting nutrition. And so then I started with the fruits, and I started with all the different fruits, and then that's what I started with. And then you can go into eggs and sardines and other types of really good high quality protein as well. A lot of kids at that age are very allergic to eggs, I found. Both my kids were. So, I had to, limit that and try to reintroduce it later. And it worked, at 2.5 now, he's able to have eggs and be okay. So,
What about beans? Did you
beans? Yes,
Yeah.
beans are fantastic. Kids love beans, especially when they start working on their pincher grip around 9 months. 9 months to 12 months old, they love picking up beans and eating them. And I make all different kinds of beans. So that's the other thing, is like keeping the variety. Like, don't always make black beans, because then when you go to the Mexican restaurant and they have pinto beans, your kids are gonna be like, I'm not eating that. But if you made black beans one week and pinto beans the next week, and then you made lima beans, they're exposed to so many different types of beans that they've seen it before, they recognize it, they can eat it. And that, I would say, is the biggest mistake parents make, is that they say, I feel like my kids only eat blank. And they make that over and over and over again, to the point where that child becomes so limited in what they're eating that they don't see any more variety in their diet, and then they're not getting that nutrition.
Right.
And
So
so when you make it a point as a parent to make something different every single day for them, and expose them to something different, and have a different color, a different variety, a different type, that is going to make such a big difference in the type of foods that they eat, and the variety that they're being exposed to, and their ability to be able to handle different situations when they're out eating and traveling. To me, like, I love traveling with my children. And so I want them to be able to like eat at a restaurant, and to be able to go to a different country and see a different fruit and want to try it and eat that. And so, when I'm at the grocery store, I'm looking for different fruits than just apples and oranges, right? I'm looking for mangoes. I'm looking for papayas. I'm looking for pomegranate seeds. I'm looking for things that aren't necessarily the typical things that you see in a child's diet, that they're being exposed to and will eat and love. And I give a different fruit every single day, after lunch. I give a different fruit for snack every single day, so I try not to have sameness in our diet.
Yeah. And in your book, you lay out too, like, charts of, options for breakfast, lunch, dinner, like exactly how you feed your kids. Like, it's so laid out and it's so incredible. And I definitely want to talk about, like, when your kids get a little bit older, like the fear of them feeling left out or going to restaurants and stuff like that. But before we move on to that, something else that you talked about in the book that I definitely want to touch on, because it's so common for little babies, are rice cereals. And that was something that you talked about that I think was really powerful. If you could just like set the stage for that, because that's like one of the first things that we're told, okay, first thing you give your baby is this rice cereal. Why do you advise against that? Like, what is that whole deal?
Well, I mean, if you think about like what's in rice, right? A lot of times it's grown in a situation that it's high in heavy metals like arsenic. So that's something you definitely don't want to expose your child to. But also, like, when you think of the nutrition in rice, there's not a lot of nutrition in rice. I mean, it's a carb, it's it's got some minerals and vitamins, but it's not something that is going to give them a real boost nutritionally. And so to me, that's like the worst thing to give a child right off the bat. Like, I would want to give children like a sardine, which is actually, I have, are you going to be posting a video of this? Like,
Yes.
Is this a video? So, okay. So like, for example, I have this, I have it right here. I'm actually doing a video later on all my snacks and things that I take to prepare, but this is from Patagonia Provisions, and it's mackerel, and it's the perfect handheld piece of fish. And they also make sardines, and people think it's crazy to give kids like a little bitty fish like this, but I tell you, my son ate these up so much when he first started eating food, and it was like some of the best nutrition you could give them. I mean, there's so much DHA, omega-3 fatty acids in this, such an amazing form of protein, and all of those really good brain chemicals. And this fish is actually low on the chain, so it's not going to have high heavy metals or anything.
I was just going to ask
and
that.
Mercury and things like that. So
okay, because it's so small.
So I love that for a child versus rice, right? And I think when they get older, serving rice with a meal to make it more enjoyable, yeah, go ahead and do that. Now we
Right.
serve rice with our salmon and do, whatever, like the whole family's enjoying that. I like rice with my salmon. I
Yeah.
actually have a recipe in the book. It's the cutest, most fun little thing to make. I learned how to make these in Japan, and they're called onogiris, and they come with these little molds, and you mold the rice in there, and then you can fill the molds with anything that you want. And I like salmon. My kids love salmon in it. And then I put another little pad of rice on top, and you can make them in the shape of like Mickey Mouse or a heart or a
Oh,
star.
cute.
And it's like a little rice, like a soft rice cake, like almost like a sushi, with the salmon inside. And they just like eat it like a little sandwich. And I send it to my daughter's
Mm.
lunch,
Oh,
and I make it
amazing.
for my son, and they love it. And they love the shapes. They think it's so much fun. And plus they're like eating salmon and rice. It's so healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So for people who maybe are listening that like haven't been doing this yet and they want to transition to this and their baby's still like months old, maybe not toddler age, and there might be like pushback if their baby's used to getting, a lot of the fruit purees or doing the rice cereals, but they're like, oh God, I'm listening to this and I want to start introducing more vegetables. Like, do you have any tips around that transition period of how you can, if someone's like, oh, they're such a picky eater right now, but I want to start changing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you have to do is have a lot of patience.
Mm,
And kids are going to eat when they're hungry. And one of the most important kind of things that I've learned is if kids snack too close to meal times, they won't eat dinner. They won't eat
mm,
breakfast. They won't eat lunch, right? They won't eat if you give them a snack, because the
mm-hmm.
snack is like their bellies are just so teeny tiny to begin with. So
Right.
if you give them a snack you really close to any of those meal times, they're not going to eat those meals. Now,
Mm,
if you are one of these alternative parents that give like vegetables for snacks, and like will give like part of it like a real meal as a snack to
mm-hmm.
avoid that, that's an interesting situation. Like, instead of giving an actual like quote unquote like typical snack at snack time, to actually give like, I used to do that with my kids when they were much littler. I would give like pinto beans as a snack because it's like a
Mm.
perfect little snack, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe like a little butter. It's like so good. Now that doesn't really fly with my 6-year-old. She's like, wait a minute, mom, we're gonna have pinto beans for dinner. Like, I'm not gonna eat
Right.
this snack. I'd rather have watermelon or whatever.
Yeah.
And so as they get older, they become more kind of accustomed to what's typical at breakfast,
Mm-hmm.
lunch, and dinner and snack. But when they're little, you can play these games, right?
Right.
And when you're making changes, when your kids are a certain way, you really have to be dedicated. You have to find a way to introduce the flavor that's not too intimidating and not with too much pressure, is what I've found. And the best way to do that is, like, for example, if you're used to, for example, rice cereal, you could switch to something more healthful, like I would say a steel cut oatmeal that you make overnight. It takes me 1 minute to put it in my crock pot. One
Mm-hmm.
minute, maybe less. I think it's less than 1 minute. And it's ready in the morning. It's so creamy, so good. And I top it off with ground flaxseed, which again is
Mm,
that omega-3 fatty acid, so good for your body, so good for the kids. And you could mix it all in, and then you could put whatever kind of sweeten the way you wanted to sweeten it or make it taste better, like by putting fruit in it, blueberries or strawberries or whatever.
mm-hmm.
And we put pomegranate seeds in our oatmeal. We love it. They're so
Yum.
good because every little bite has a little bit of juice that you just like, it like pops in your mouth,
Pops. Yeah.
and the kids love it. And plus pomegranate seeds are like one of the healthiest fruits ever, with all the
Mm.
antioxidants. So basically, you could switch to something like that. Try something like that, and
Right. Instead of
then,
going straight to broccoli or something.
right. You can go straight to broccoli, right? But
Yeah.
then you can start to expose that child to those different fruits and vegetables. And I have to say this too: kids are going to do what you do. If
Mm-hmm.
you are in the pantry snacking and eating chips, they're going to want those chips too. When my
100%.
husband goes in the pantry and gets chips out, both kids run right over to that pantry and
Mm-hmm.
they want a chip too, right? If he didn't go and open that bag of chips and go into the pantry, they wouldn't even know about chips. I'm
Right.
not a chip person, so I don't even buy, like, I'm like not a chip person. But
Yeah.
if we wouldn't even have chips in the house if it wasn't for my husband, right? So you just have to think that you are your ultimate child's role model, and how
Mm-hmm.
you eat is definitely going to be a reflection on how they eat. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
can make your diet super variety, have a super variety in it, have it very colorful, and have all these things that you're eating with your child. And that's another tip, is to eat as many meals with your child throughout the day, and
Mm-hmm.
sit down and actually have a meal, not have them run around the house, taking a bite here and there. And that's something that thankfully my lifestyle has afforded me to do, where I work from home. But
Right.
every day I take a break at lunch and I go have lunch with my son every
So
single day.
nice. Yeah.
And
And
every
even
night
if
we have a
parents
family
don't
meal.
have that luxury, maybe just one meal, even if you could do
Yeah.
dinner together or something, or even if
Or
they're like
breakfast. Yeah. Something.
weekends, something like that, obviously everyone has a different working situation, but I think it's so helpful to talk about, like, okay, you start modeling it first, make changes that are just like mimicking what you were doing, but just like improving it as you go. So their palate will start to slowly change. I want to talk to you about this too, because obviously you could control so much more when they're little, right? Of like what they're eating. But when they get to that maybe school age, or you're going out to restaurants or going to birthday parties, like that is something that is, especially depending on where you live, there might not even be restaurants where there's organic foods or good options and stuff like that, or birthday parties. Like, would you, when they were like little, like probably, toddler age or whatever, bring food for them? But then once they get older, are they noticing like, okay, everyone is eating this, but mom brought me this? Like, how do you navigate that?
So up until about 5, I was able to just bring whatever. Like if Harley knew there was going to be a treat at the birthday party, I could convince her to eat the like healthier treat that I brought, because
Right.
she likes the treats we have because they're good and she knows them and she likes them.
Mm-hmm.
But now that she's 6, it's like that transition of that awareness just kind of blossoms. And so
Yeah.
she wants to eat what the other kids are eating too.
Mm-hmm.
So I've taken a very important approach in educating her about the food we eat in this world and what's available. And we have a tremendous opportunity to teach our kids what we didn't know when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine if my mother had taught me at the age of 4 and 5 years old what artificial food dyes are. Actually, I think I started teaching Harley when she was 6 or 7, 8 months old. Like I started just talking about it when we were at the airport, and I would show her all the junk candy and I would tell her what's in it because she just wanted to play with it because it was like shiny packages. And I would
Yeah.
just like tell her, just get it ingrained in her mind, in her subconscious, because like that time period between 0 and 7, we literally mold our children to like be the people they are and to have the subconscious and think the way we really want them to think, if we had the opportunity to like influence that. And so I just told her from such an early age all the truth about all the food, and tell her like about McDonald's and about all of these places, so that she's
Mm-hmm.
aware of what's in them. And today actually there's an ice cream truck coming, and oh man, I'm cringing at the fact that I don't know what's in that ice cream. I
I
don't know
know.
what truck's coming. I don't know what's going to go on at school.
Yeah.
And she's been so aware of how to choose the best choices when there is a situation like that. I'm feeling very confident that she's going to choose something that isn't too terribly colored and gross, I hope.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Like maybe she'll
um
choose something that just is maybe a regular ice cream, but doesn't have all the food coloring in it or something.
Right. And so she usually makes really good choices with that. And what she does at birthday parties now is she'll say, "Mom, that blue icing, I'm just not going to eat that. I'm going to eat the
Wow.
cake instead." And
Wow.
she takes off the icing and she doesn't miss it. She loves cake just the way it
Hmm.
is. But if she sees the white icing, she's like, "Mom, I can eat that. Like it doesn't have any
Yeah.
color." And so she's making those decisions kind of on her own now.
Hmm.
And we talked about it the other day. It's just like, "Mom, what if all of it, everything that comes to school that day with the ice cream truck, like what if everything's artificially dyed? I can just have it once in a while, right?" And I said, "It's not going to harm you to have it once in a while. And
Right.
I don't want you to ever think that that's going to happen, but
Hmm.
you make the best choice you can and
Yeah.
you decide. And if you eat something and it doesn't taste good, you don't have to finish it." And that's the
Right.
most important lesson too, is to like listen to your body. If something doesn't feel right and it doesn't taste good or taste fake or yuck, like,
Hmm.
once you eat real food, sometimes when you eat something processed, it just doesn't taste good anymore. Like
You could
a
tell.
processed, like any kind of processed cookie to me right now, with the exception of maybe mint Newman's Oreos. Like those
Mhm.
are really
Yeah.
freaking good.
Yeah.
With the exception of those, right? I can't eat a processed cookie. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
even interest me because a real cookie out of the oven that's baked fresh is like a million times better, right?
It
It's like,
is.
why even bother with that processed cookie, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's like gaga over these Simple Mills Oreo lookalike cookies and everybody loves them. And I took one bite and I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it's just like, this is awful. You know, like, why do I want to eat this?
Right. No, it's so
So,
true.
anyways,
But
but
so I think that's really the point is like educating them at a young age, I think is really important of teaching them like, hey, this is what this is. This is what this could do to your brain. And this is how you could feel after it. And having the education so then they can make their own choices and feel like empowered in them. But also the conversation too of like it's okay once in a while because then it's also like, well, I don't want them to be fearful, like they're going to eat it and just like their health is going to deteriorate immediately. You know what I mean? Because it's such a hard balance, I think, to try and figure that out. But I like that, like, okay, when they're younger, I'm just going to bring their own food to the birthday parties. But obviously, once they start, like you said, they get a little older and noticing it, hopefully at that point, they'll be able to make, better decisions based off of how you taught them. So I think that's such a good tip. Okay, so I know we're gonna be wrapping it up. The one last thing I want to end on is what are some of the like if you were like this is the worst ingredients in children's foods, like these are the like top things to just start avoiding if someone's just starting this and they're like, I don't know where to start, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, there's so many different things, if they're maybe having the traditional like standard American diet right now where everything is processed, which most people listening to this are more further along than that, but what would you just recommend is like things to really look out for and change more quickly than other things?
I would. So I have this in the book in chapter 2. There is this guide that says like it's the terrible 10. It's the worst ingredients
Hmm.
in children food.
That's what I
And you can
pulled.
go
Yes.
through that, right? And figure out what ingredients are in like the processed foods that you have in the pantry. But let's just step back a minute. Like in terms of the most important thing, the most important thing is not a specific ingredient. It's whether choosing real food over processed food. Like
Mm,
as soon as you choose a processed product, you're exposing your child to plastic chemicals, to less nutrition, to additional chemicals that it would take to process that food, the
mm,
chemicals that are in the packaged good, right? So you're exposing your child to an enormous amount of variety that you don't want them to have
mm,
access to. So when you're thinking about, should I give them this dried fruit roll up or I give them a real apple, go for the real apple, go for the
right.
real mango, go for the frozen fruit, right?
Hmm.
It's already cut, washed, frozen, ready to go. Keep it on the counter for a few minutes so it's not so hard. Give that to them if you're in a rush, right?
Right.
It's always available. It's like if you don't have any fresh fruit in the house, you should have something in the freezer.
Hmm.
I would much rather that decision be made by a parent than what processed chemicals should I avoid. Although I
Mm,
have that list, and it's a detailed list and it tells you why to avoid certain things. I mean, I would say off the top of my head, the biggest chemical that I would want my kids to avoid in processed foods, it's in everything, is natural flavors because it
mm,
hijacks your brain. It hijacks you thinking that you're eating something better than it is. It's
mm,
you're eating the 1 millionth best part of the taste versus what's actually available in nature. So it's
right.
tricking your brain. And so you're going to eat more than you should of that processed product. You're going to crave it. You're going to want it all the time.
Hmm.
And that's a problem when it comes to kids and the way we're heading towards childhood obesity and other problems that are happening as children grow up in this country that's not happening, it's happening at an alarming rate right now in this country. So,
Yeah. I
so we
like
want
that.
to avoid that.
That's such an
Another
easier
thing I
tip.
would say is to avoid any kind of white flour, right? Like
Mm,
white flour products, like that's just sugar and really refined. And so if you can up the nutrition of your typical products that contain white flour, like for example, instead of buying the frozen waffles, make a bunch of waffles on the weekend, right?
hmm.
And freeze them and just they'll be frozen waffles too, but they're your own ingredients and you can make frozen waffles out of oat flour or
Mm-hmm.
almond flour or
Mm-hmm.
buckwheat flour or a mixture of those three. So it'll be so much healthier than just the white
Yeah.
flour Eggo waffles that you would buy in the freezer section, right? So
Right.
if you're making pancakes, try, the almond flour pancakes that I have in Food Babe Kitchen, my first cookbook. Like
Mm-hmm.
those are amazing and they taste so good and they're fluffy and they're beautiful and you wouldn't even know wasn't white flour in it, right? And
Yeah.
with maple syrup and butter, you're not missing anything. And
Right.
so think about what you can do to remove that white flour. Goldfish are one of the most popular crackers for kids, and it's one of the things that cause the most cavities. People would think that it's the candy kids
Wow.
diet or the sugary juices or whatever, but it's actually goldfish. It's that white flour just sticking inside the tooth, and
Wow.
that's part of the issue. So we have to
Mm.
avoid eating things like goldfish. We need to have more variety in our diet when it comes to our flours.
Wow, I love that. So it makes it so much easier. Like, okay, let's just focus on whole foods, focus on no natural flavors, no white flour. That's and like you said, it does take a little bit more effort to like make all of this, but it's gonna be less effort in taking them to the doctors all the time. Their mood's gonna be better, their attention's gonna be better. So that's so amazing. This has been so helpful. Do you have a copy of the book you could hold up?
I
Maybe?
do. I have this
I
fake
know it's
smart
not out
fake
yet.
copy right now.
Okay,
It's
there we go. So
okay.
when is
Yeah,
it
it's Food
coming
Babe
out?
Family. Yeah.
When does it come out?
It comes out in October.
Okay, in October. Okay,
But you
amazing.
can
So,
pre-order it now, and
oh,
I'm
amazing.
working on this video bonus. So hold on to your seat and you can come on over to foodbabefamily.com and you'll get a video bonus on all the snacks my family eats.
Oh, amazing. That was the other thing. I was like, what are some quick toddler snacks that aren't like artificial or aren't processed foods? You have so much of that in the book. And you have so many blogs and so many resources about it too. So, okay, it's foodbabefamily.com to pre-order.
Yes.
Okay, amazing. And where else can everybody find you and all your resources and everything
Just
you have?
foodbabe.com. Everything's there. Food Babe Family's there, and all the links to Truvani. And if you guys are in the want to check out the healthiest bar on the market, it's all made with ingredients you'd find in your own kitchen, and they're delicious. They taste so good. It's like more like
Amazing.
dessert.
Yeah.
My kids love them. They like die for them.
Okay,
And
amazing.
yeah,
So
that's
there's
yeah,
the go. There, that could be a toddler snack right
yep,
there. Okay, awesome. Everything is there. Food Babe on Instagram as well, and all the places.
yeah. The
And
Food Babe on Instagram.
okay, and we will put all of this in the show notes. Vani, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You just poured so much information. You're doing such like important work, and I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for taking the time to share all of this with us.
Great to meet you. Thank you so much.